not sure what time of the day it is for other people, but here it is evening. Just also, please give me some kind of signal if you can hear me okay. Is there sound?
Yes.
Perfect. Hey, nice to see you. Very nice. And yeah, actually, Irene, it's very nice that you're here. I was also thinking maybe at some point if you would like to also comment on a few things regarding transcendental time perspective. So that would be that would be much appreciated. But thank you once again for joining this open lecture and actually helping me record this for my students who are mostly based in the United States. And I find it very difficult to speak to no one or just the computer screen. At least, I mean, it's still a computer screen, but I kind of like I see some of the names or at least the people I know and and I see some faces. So it's a great support for me. Thank you so much. And yeah, so I will today I will talk about it's a general lecture describing different projects and different approaches to how a sense of time develops, and so how we studied also the time perspective across different age groups. And so it's a little bit kind of a mosaic of different things. And I think we can also use the chat if you have any questions. I hope also that Amandeep joins us today, so he can also help me to read the questions. But if not, then maybe I can ask Rin to be on the lookout if there are any questions in the chat that I managed to answer if there are any questions at the end. And yeah, so it's going to be like a very fast forward train, or kind of how do you say it, like an express train through issues of development and time perspective. And but I hope it still gives an idea, and maybe also just kind of describes the field and also some white spots in it. And so I think we can slowly start, and people will be joining when they can. I'm still a little bit struggling with this technology, so but I hope it works, and I want to share this one. Yes, there we go. And then I don't know what you see. It's always a bit of a mystery for me how this works. But very warm welcome. So I will talk about different developmental issues connected to the sense of time and time perspective and other things. And it's also, yeah, most of the things are going to be what is happening throughout the lifespan, but there are also a few things that I would briefly cover, which are happening a little bit before and a little bit after. And we'll talk also about a few things that not only personality factors play a role, but also the role of the context, the role of environment, and more broader the culture, but also the situation. And if we kind of start from the usual beginning, so if you look at the experience of time in children. And I really like this quote from my colleague in Sweden, Godse Experiments. She was saying how she got interested in the field of time, and she was saying that in my case, it was my daughter Sophia who led me to study time and later the field of time perspective research. Because when she was 3 years old, she asked me, "Mommy, you always say tomorrow to me. We are going to do this tomorrow. Go somewhere. But Mommy, what do you actually mean by tomorrow?" So that's something that for Grazia was a starting point in the field, and I'm pretty sure that many of us can relate to this feeling in terms of like when how maybe if we remember our own experiences of time, or maybe if we have younger siblings, or if we are having our own kids, in terms of how does this appear. So we're trying to explain this very abstract concept of time, that is, something is going to happen tomorrow, something is going to happen in 1 hour, and it takes some time in the developmental process until we actually get these mechanisms of understanding this abstraction. And and my and so, of course, a lot of things were also in this regard were done by Jean Piaget, and so he also described the stages of intellectual development, and he's done very beautiful experiments with children in terms of the development of time. And what he's saying, his theory, that time, kind of like in itself as an abstract concept, doesn't exist for children up to the stage of what he was calling operative intelligence. So that's about 6, 7 years old. So when children can think logically and also manipulate those symbolic representations. And so, because before that stage, it's kind of like something that maybe is of a brighter color, or is moving faster. That's would be attributed to this. That's just because of the brightness of something, that the speed is increasing, and so there is a different representations of that. And he has a lovely book, which I will also show you. It's I don't know if you probably would see it in reverse, but it's the child's conception of time. And so it's a lovely compilation of his experiments and different observations, and a lot of interesting quotes. And so I would like to quote a little bit from it, because I think it's a very interesting case also, and we get the idea of how it is develops. And so the interviewer is talking to a boy who is 4 years old, and so he says, "I have two brothers, Felipe and Robert, and they're are they older or younger than you? Older than me, much older. Yes. How old are they? I don't know. Do they go to the big school? Yes, both of them. Is one older than the other? No, both of them are the same age," which is wrong. Were they born on the same day? Yes, but it's also a wrong answer. Are they twins? No, but they are the same age all the same? Yes, the same age as myself. Who was born first then? Felipe and then Robert, which is correct. And who was born first, Felipe or you? I. Wrong. And so, who is the oldest of you three? Nobody. But you told me you were born before Felipe, so you must have been there when Felipe was born. Oh, sure, I was there. This seems quite evident to him. So, who was born first in your whole family? No one. Felipe came second, then Robert, and I was the fourth because I'm the 4-year-old. So it's a very different conception of who is older, who is younger, who is and kind of, and if you read more in this book, so they make more interviews, and they show that actually, like, when the kids are getting older, so they understand the sequence better, and also the different conception also of age is developing, and it's really fascinating. I really warmly recommend to look at those. But that's basically how kind of that the development is going. And so actually before let's see if I can make this kind of like until we have this specific capacity to actually understand this very abstract terms of time, because also, as I was mentioning also before, we don't have like a specifically bodily dedicated organ to tell time, so we tell it in a different way. And the clock time that we are operating very much these days is something not so natural. It became kind of like very dominant in our culture due to specific events, but it is something for the clock time. We would usually agree on meeting with somebody according to a particular event, and so we would meet. For example, at a time when we take our cows to drink the water, and so everybody would know when is this happening, and so there is it was a particular like a very different culture. And so for kids, and it takes time also like to understand how do we conceptualize those abstract things as yesterday and tomorrow, 1 hour, 2 hours, 10 minutes. And so that's I think I've heard also some other examples when people kind of I say that also like the kid starts to understand that if their mom is saying it's going to happen in 10 minutes, then it's most likely it's not going to happen ever. And things like this. And so also I'm pretty sure you can come up with your own examples in terms of how does that work. And Godse was also doing some very interesting experiments, because also although as we can see that, I mean, kids, they don't have this vocabulary maybe in terms of operating with those abstract temporal terms, but they still have the sense of time, and they know what is happening like this, some of the sequence they can really understand, especially if there is also the effect is involved. Because what they've done in their studies, they put up a puppet show, and so they would be like a good hero, some kind of villain, and so the kids, if they would be more emotionally connected, so they could actually say, so which hero was before whom and for how long, or like was not in absolute terms, so like 10 minutes, but they were longer or shorter than another character in that play. And if we kind of like spring forward a little bit, and I will stop a little bit at the adolescence period, because here we can say that Kurt Lewin was really mentioning that this period is really fundamental in this regards, because there are very deep changes that are happening to the time perspective, and because the scope of time, that kind of like the scope of time ahead, something that is going to, like this kind of like the future perspective, it starts to enlarge. So something that is starts to influence our present behavior is becoming more motivating and more dominant, and it's also like it's increasing during this stage. And so there is this. He was saying that it is this period seems to be very like particular deep changes that are happening to time perspective. And I would like to show this diagram of his, and I will comment it a little bit, because it's not so easy to grasp if you've never kind of encountered the life. This life space theory of his. And so I don't know if you can see my mouse. Yeah, maybe. So it's kind of like it represents this life space of an individual, and so individual. So that's we have here the space of a child, and then a life space of an adult. And at the time that the person sees themselves in a certain situation at present and expects a certain situations in their immediate or later future. And that's where he's like saying that when it is a child, so we have only something very close to our present space. So the future is very kind of like it's a very short term future, and then longer it starts to expand like once we get older. And the so it's also there's the immediate future, but there is also the later future, and so there is also this immediate psychological future or later psychological future. And another thing what he's distinguishing here is that there is the level of reality reality. And so that's where this little r stands for. And so that's what he says, equivalent to what the person really expects to come true. And then there is another level, which he's calling a level of irreality, corresponding to what they might dream, hope for, or fear. And for instance, on the irreality level, the person seems himself closer to the goal than he expects to be at the time. And so this kind of like distinguishing between in terms of what like the actual expectations and something that people are afraid or hoping for or dreaming, so they kind of they fluctuate. And then there is this also maybe more understanding in terms of what am I capable in terms of doing now, or what I would like to do later in the future. And so that's what he is also saying, that this adult life space shows a greater degree of differentiation in the dimension of reality and irreality for a given psychological time. And also the time perspective of the adult influencing their present behavior generally covers a larger time span. And so that's what he's kind of like saying just here, that the scope of time ahead, which influences the present behavior, it becomes greater. So it's not only my immediate need, that as a child I want to eat, I want to sleep, and if I'm not comfortable, I really loudly kind of like say about those things. And so when we are becoming adults, so we are kind of like really going more into further future planning, and some very further away goals start to motivate our behavior now. And I also see here Jennifer, so maybe also Jennifer would be interested to chip in with a few things, that she studied future time perspective so extensively. So maybe it will be great also to hear some of your comments as well. And I kind of like this. If we look also at the so Erik Erikson kind of like was the first scholar who put the development in terms of, it still is considered the stages, and it is but he was considering the whole lifespan of an adult, and so how it is happening. And so there adolescence also has been a very interesting period in this regards, because that's where at least was considered at the time. So there is this identity versus role confusion process is happening. The aspect of the social relationships is very important. And so here it's these identity processes are happening, and that can also kind of like lead to a lot of different interesting things that are very much related to also to time perspective, in terms of how this future focus is happening. And we've seen, I wanted to give just also like a brief mention a few things here, because I think it's becoming more and more difficult to talk about very general models. There will be always the role of culture and the role of the situation and the context of the situation which is happening now. And I would like to give this example because also I think we can really much relate it to it at the moment. So our colleagues also from United States, Zina Mello and Frank Worrell, so they were studying also future time perspective in adolescents, both in United States and in Nigeria. And in their study, which I believe was done in around in 2015, 2016, so they say that they showed how Nigerians think much more about the future than Americans. And so specifically, 97% of Nigerians thought about the future every day, compared to 60% of Americans, even after controlling for socioeconomic status and some other factors. And of course, it is a huge difference. But if we will look into this a little bit more into cultural and historical context, if we zoom out a little bit from these results, what was happening in Nigeria at the time? We have about 200 births per 1,000 women aged 15 to 19. So they're becoming mothers at almost at when they are adolescents. So that's and it's quite a huge number. The overall country also has a very high score on the Global Hunger Index. 40% of children who are born, they're underweight, and they are second place in the world for the new HIV. So there is also a lot of threats that are in this context. So I'm kind of like thinking, if I would live in this world, I think I would be also concerned about the future on a daily basis. And I think if we would do this study in United States right now, in the midst of the corona crisis, maybe these results will be very different. So in 2015-16 they were saying that 60% of Americans were kind of like thinking daily about the future. So maybe this number would be very close to 100, I would probably think, and in many other parts of the world as well. So that's where I think that we can also kind of like remember about this, that it's not only the developmental processes, but they are happening in a larger context also. So there are other factors that influence this development of various aspects of the time perspective. We talked briefly about the cognitive maturation. So the context, like the social and economic conditions. There is also things connected to parental behavior, the age, the gender, level of education, family status, and work experience. And some of those factors I will comment also a bit more. So if we look into the societal and economic conditions, and I think everybody can relate to these ones at the moment, so it's not like something that I need to really explain. But under normal or like stable conditions, so then we can really see that extensive future orientation would be much more adaptable. And when it is socially or economically deprived groups or conditions, so then the shorter time perspective is more adaptive, because more distant future brings more uncertainties or also pessimistic expectations. And I bring out those results also from the Russian study done right after the big economic crisis in 1998, but it's very much similar to the situation we are experiencing now. And also some of my students, we discussed a little bit about this kind of like the notion of zero time, when kind of there is so much uncertainty. And of course it's we kind of like we can try to plan for the future, but we really don't know how it's going to evolve. So it's of course then and it brings too much anxiety, too much fear, and then it's like it's of course it's much more manageable when you are living in a more shorter time perspectives. So that's this one, and it's kind of like I was usually giving this example in terms of when I was living in Russia, and so that's also kind of more in terms of that's a lot of uncertainties. You don't really know what is going to happen tomorrow. It was more about the economic instabilities and also these frequent bombings that were happening in Moscow. So it was kind of also you don't really feel the ground under your feet, so you don't really plan for too long. And so that's why also organizations, they also work in a particular time schedule. So whatever you have a deadline, it was always yesterday. And so that's kind of like whatever you do, it was always due yesterday. And but it is, it's very much about survival. And so then after living for 8 years in that kind of schedule, I moved to Sweden, which is on a completely different spectrum in this here. So in some ways it's also closer. So it's like it's also secular rational values. So it's not a very traditional society like some other countries you see here on the graph. It's from the World Values Survey done by Engelhardt. But when I moved to Sweden, so that I really felt like I'm living on a different planet, because people somehow were like very relaxed about their everyday, and they were talking about taking vacation for like 1 year from now, and I just could not imagine. So how in the world they can do that? But it's Sweden, I think, is also a very interesting case of a country where on their land they did not have a war for 200 years. They did have their economic things happening in terms of economics, and so there was a big migration also into United States at some point, but still kind of like not having this physical threat of anything on their land. It allowed also, I think, for a particular and very stable development, and also developing of a particular support society also for their citizens. And so that's also like now I'm in Denmark. It's kind of still kind of like very close to there, but that really felt when especially the first year when I lived there, that I'm living like in a different planet totally. So that's and something that I mean we can also see now that the overall kind of like stability, instability changes, the level of uncertainty rises. So that's also creates differences in how we perceive a time and how we do with it. A few things in terms of the socialization. It's very much also related to the culture in which we are socialized. But it's also Gisela Tromsdorf was doing very interesting also research. And so she was saying that an extended future as such does not necessarily indicate a well-adapted personality. Because also if, for example, if there are cognitive difficulties to future, then it is more appropriate, again, to direct one's thinking and behavior to events and goals in the near future, and then slowly kind of like work through that. And children with learning difficulties also are more successful if they set those learning goals in the near future, because again this distant future is something that can be perceived with a lot of anxiety, and then it's less manageable. So that's another way of looking at it. And I think, yes, so in terms of the parental behavior, also from the same author, that's I think is also some interesting results. Which says actually if the perceived parental kind of like is perceived higher, so then people are more optimistic about the future. They're more hopeful and believe in this ability to influence personal future. And so I think for me also, like as a practitioner, I kind of like I make an accent here on the perceived parental support, because what we also see in terms of if we look at the negative past, the dimension that sometimes that people can have a high score on the negative past due to really true traumatic events, but sometimes it can be just due to neutral events which people interpret in a negative way. And so then we can work with this subjective dimension. And it's kind of the same here in terms of we can always kind of like unwind in this regard, because maybe people perceive that they did not get enough parental support, but it was actually there. And then we can kind of like make it more as a resource for people. So that's kind of like very kind of like, as I said, just like a mosaic. And I would like to talk also briefly about the study that we conducted in Russia. So we looked at the people across different age groups. And there were some interesting results in terms of, and we were using the Zimbardo time perspective inventory, and at the time it was before Godse introduced the 6 dimensions, so we were working only with the 5 factors. So the past negative, past positive, optimistic, present, and future. And so that's we had quite a good number of people at the time, and I would like, yeah, there we go. So we and also we managed to cover quite a large kind of spectrum in terms of. It was not only done in Moscow, so we actually managed to collect data from a variety of places in Russia, both in a smaller places and also in big metropolitan cities. And now I lost my mouse. Wait a second, sorry. Oh, yeah, there we go. And so when we look at the age, so there is like a combination of factors. It's also uh, the gender that actually plays a role. And if we look at what is happening across ages with the past negative, so it's a lot of people talk about the positive aging. It's not really happening in Russia, or at least not really happening for women. And so it's basically, you see that's kind of like after late 40s, so it like starting from the 50s. So that's there is like a very big difference in terms of how people perceive their past. And uh, women are perceiving it much more in a negative way. And here, and I will comment a little bit also later in terms of why it's happening. If you look at the past positive here, we didn't see any significant gender or age differences. So, but it was quite, or overall, generally quite a high score for the population. In terms of the present hedonistic, so here we see a trend that we see also happen across other cultures. It was also true definitely in Spain, and I believe in Czech Republic as well. So it's generally declining with age for both for women and men. And so that's I think something also for us that who are practicing psychologists, also to kind of some things to work with. So how to teach people to not to forget this playfulness about being in the present moment, and also being mindful in the present moment. Maybe not so much risk taking. In terms of present fatalistic, it's also a very similar trend as with the past negative. So for women see their present much more fatalistically than men, and it also starts to increase like from 50s and very drastically 60s and 70s. And in terms of the future, we've seen some very interesting trends. And so also I think that would be interesting to redo this study now, because what we've seen here, and this study was done in 2007, 2008. So a lot of people that really kind of boost in their future around the age of 50. And I really need to comment here, because that at the time it was the pension age for women was 50, and for men it was 55. So I think it was only just last year when it was revised, the pension age in Russia. So that's a kind of like, at the time people felt, yeah, now we finished our kind of like working career, and there was an okay kind of like pension system, and so the people kind of like felt a boost. So also like in terms of activities, now I can also do something else. Kids are grown up, I don't really need to kind of also tend for them, so I can actually start my own life in a way. And another also interesting increase was that people in their 70s and older, we had the oldest person in our sample was 84, and with these people you can't really give them the questionnaire just and to fill it out. You need to sit down with them. You ask the questions, but you also talk and you listen. And so what we found out here that they say that it's we plan for the future and we think about the future, but it's not so much for our own future anymore. It's the future of our children and especially of our grandchildren. So it's much more this kind of like generational thinking and transgenerational future as well. So that was something very, very interesting in this regard. And if you look also, of course, there are a plethora of other factors. And I've seen also like recently, uh, Martina Klitspierova also just published an article. They've done also a kind of like a lifespan a study as well, and it's very similar kind of like factors that they observe, that the level of education also plays a role, and and the family status is also plays a role in terms of how it is developing. And work experience. So also in terms of the work experience, it was very interesting that the really this kind of this present hedonistic starts to really go down, at least in the Russian sample, when people start to get their first work experience, because also future is kind of like at work you have to be much more responsible, you have to plan much more, and so that's kind of this dimension becomes much more also boosted and present. We also looked into a little bit in terms of if people are working within the same field as their initial education, and so also if they're like satisfied with their choice and things like this. And there was interesting that actually people who work within the same field, for them this past positive dimension was also much more higher than those do not work. And that is also kind of connected to different life stages. So it's also I think, since we have our study was not longitudinal, so it's also more about the societal changes, because while it was still the Soviet Union, people were really sure that if they would get an education as an engineer, they will get a job as an engineer. And then everything got really kind of like turbulently changed, and so okay, you get an education, and then if you kind of like okay, you try to do something with it, and if you're lucky, then you maybe manage to get the same job within the same field, but it was not really wouldn't be sure as it used to be. So it's also kind of like talking about this flexibility and looking at getting an education more as like a system, some kind of coordinates of, okay, how do I orient myself in this world of knowledge? And so what do I know from this particular specialization and how I can apply it to the real world? And it might be mismatch kind of, so it's not exactly the same, but it was more kind of like this about this flexibility. And we've done a very similar study some years later after that initial one. So that was in 2013, and we were also kind of like still thinking in terms of what was happening. And there were some interesting trends, and some of them were quite actually sad. Some trends, because we see that also. This kind of like women became maybe more present hedonistic in this new study, and that could be more also as a reaction to another changes. But another way that it's also the present fatalistic actually became less, or kind of like it was shown that it is not so high, but in some groups. But for the elderly people, it's again it's kind of the same picture. So this we can't really kind of like see any like positive aging happen there, because in both of the studies the numbers were quite high. We also looked at, it's not completely related to the to time perspective, but it's still an interesting concept, this tolerance for ambiguity. And we've seen some kind of interesting changes here, because in our earlier study, people who were in their 30s, they were kind of like lower in this tolerance for ambiguity than people who were in the same age group, but in the later study. So also we can kind of like maybe see that society is also changing. So because again, in 2008, 2009, there was another financial crisis. So kind of like, okay, again, we don't know what is happening tomorrow. So which bank is going to survive this financial crisis? Again, we don't know. So we kind of like, we develop more of this tolerance for ambiguity. But again, it's kind of, mm, it kind of works for some of the age groups, but not for the others. And past positive, again, it's actually that was a bit on an alarming trend, because at least in our study that we've done in 2007, people in the later age groups, older age groups, I mean, they were much more positive at that time than people when we've done the study in 2013. So there is some, people become in their 30s, they become more tolerant for ambiguity, but the more older population kind of gets less and less resources in terms of how to support themselves, and so there is not much of positive aging happening there. And it's the same kind of like with this in the same line in this environmental mastery, which is also one of the dimensions of psychological well-being that's proposed by Carol Reef. We've seen also quite some alarming trends that people who are older, they kind of see that they really can't control things that are happening around them, and that's before they still felt more kind of empowered in a way. But that's a situation in Russia, and that's again, it's very how to say. Um, country-specific cultural context, also like how development in this country was happening due to all of these different things. So that's and we see some, as I said, like some of these things are similar across other countries as well. So we've seen similar things in terms of past negative and present fatalistic in Spain and in Portugal. And then and present hedonistic is kind of like, it's going down with age across many different countries. That's kind of been very similar results. And and as I said, like I'm very looking forward for Martina's publication, because it's also like it's also in a way a post communistic space, but also a different cultural context. So I'm really looking forward in terms of to see what is happening there and if it's comparable to Russian results, or it's more like Spain and Portugal. And so I would like to say also a few things about transcendental future. And I know that Rin was, now I can't really see everybody, but if Rin is still there, then she could also maybe comment a few things. Because there was also a dimension proposed by Zimbardo and Boyd, and then there was a scale developed, and so which is something about beliefs about is there life after death, and also maybe this particular transcendental future, which is something beyond our death, if it still also can control what is happening or kind of like motivate my behavior now. And so the idea was that there are some beliefs about being rewarded or punished for the present behavior, but the reinforcement comes only after people's death. And many struggled with this scale. So a lot of my colleagues, like Antanas Kairis from Lithuania, or Wessel van Beek from Netherlands, and my former PhD student Rin Sema from Estonia. So there was like a lot of people struggled with it. And so Rin kind of finally concluded that this transcendental time perspective inventory is a reliable scale, which is measuring belief in an afterlife, but not really a time perspective. And I think we have this very nice opportunity that, I mean, Rin is here and she can actually tell maybe a few things about this. I can give the word to you.
Okay. Do you want that I explain what I meant with this sentence?
Yeah, sure. And also just if you can share some of your, experiences with the struggle.
Okay. I found that a scale measures a belief. That means if the people believes, if there is the transcendental future at all, but the scale does not measure how often the person thinks about past, present, or future, or transcendental future. That means the scale doesn't measure time as we think about time. That time means that the person should experience the future and dream about the future. And dreaming of the future, transcendental future, is not the same as just believing that there is the transcendental future. Okay, I don't know if it makes sense, but this is different, just to think about it or to imagine oneself there.
Yes. Thank you. And also, so if there are more specific questions in terms of this transcendental struggle, you're more than welcome to also to ask Rin and Antanas and Vessel in terms of this dimension. And also our colleague Wessel from Netherlands, he also proposed another dimension, like a prenatal past. But it's kind of also, I think it was very much connected to his personal story of becoming a father. And so also he was kind of thinking about, so in terms of if the child is going to be born, so maybe there are some kind of expectations, and also our cultural scripts in terms of how this child should be developing, and how do we actually care for it, and things like this. And so in this interview that we've made with him, so he said that also was he went to a workshop by American Indian psychiatrist Salman Akhtar. And so he said that one of these interesting things he mentioned was the question, who was the child before it was born? And kind of he was saying that this idea, this concept kind of kept him very interested for a long time. And so also this he did also some of the studies regarding the transcendental future, this time of after death, but also what was it before birth that influenced us in who we became. And so he's calling it prenatal past, and regards it to be a mixture of cultural, religious, intergenerational, and familial influences that affect the attachment that already takes places even before the conception. And so there is already someone, even if that someone is never born. And it is not just a positive thing, it's about traditions, but also about expectations projected upon the unborn. And so, but after this interview, so he actually conducted also some really interesting research, which was published not so long ago, also in our book. And so that's kind of, and I don't know if Wessel is with us, I'm not sure, but that would be also nice if he would be, then we can also get some insights from him. But I think that was mostly what I wanted to say today, in terms of just to give this an overview. So how kind of like we conceptualize time, also like across different age groups, what type of factors play a role. And of course, most of it, as we can see, it is this role of the context and the situation that we find ourselves in. And so I think now maybe I can also stop sharing this so that I can actually see more people. And I think we can take some questions. And I actually see one of my students. So if Darby, if you have any questions from on behalf of the whole class, so you, but we can also otherwise. We have. Feel free to. We are not a very big group today, so we can also discuss more some things, and it will be also great to hear some maybe comments or maybe some additions from Jennifer. So that would be also great. And I see there is somebody writing in the chat. Yes. Any questions, comments, greetings?
Hi, everybody. I didn't want to just talk over people. I can have a tendency to do that. Jennifer Huseman, hi. So I've been thinking about this, where we're, and that's my cat, and we'll all hear. That's one of the lovely things of Zoom. That I've been thinking about this idea of how one deals with uncertainty and how time perspective, that narrowing of time perspective might be good right now in this moment of uncertainty and the pandemic. But I'm also wondering if is it possible, and this is just based on, I'm asking this question of the whole group and of you in particular in terms of your research, is it possible that a future orientation, if someone is used to thinking of the future and may be able to hold multiple futures in their head and be able to make plans, could that actually be helpful at this time? Because it's just, this comes from my own life partly. Right now, I'm having to make plans for if we come out of social isolation, plans for if we don't come out, plans for if there's and I have to hold all these ideas at one time. And that's using my future orientation as a muscle. It's a really good thing that I have it. So I think if there's absolutely no control, then shutting it down to that, 3 feet window might be helpful. But anyway, so I guess I'm challenging in my own head the idea that a shorter time perspective might be useful in times of uncertainty. So that's I'm just going to put that out there as a question.
But I think it's an interesting observation, and we can also, ponder about it.
I'm very open to people just telling me, no, all the work that you've ever read says that a future orientation during a time of crisis is a bad thing. I would also love to hear that. So.
But I think what is interesting is kind of like if you are, because the study that Musdebayev done, it was like a large scale, study. And so that's something that we see as, like a average temperature of the room, And so of course, also like as a reaction, people kind of like, because it's like it becomes too scary to plan. And I think it also depends on in terms of if there was kind of a previous experience of similar events or not. And of course, like this crisis of 1998, it was one of probably the biggest ones ever happened there, because like within just one night, the ratio of ruble to dollar, it was 6 rubles per $1. It became 24 just within one night. And then just within 3 months, the inflation rate was 80%. So that was also like a very specific situation. And in terms of that, okay, and you're receiving the same salary, not with the 80% increase. So then it's like I don't think you can really plan really too far in such conditions. So I think it also depends what type of instability are we experiencing. Because I think in terms of the situation we are going through now, it will depend also highly in terms of, because my teaching position is very up much in the air, because we are teaching study abroad students. And we don't know if students are going to come in the fall. They're definitely not coming in the summer. So that is also kind of like, can I still plan my vacation a year from now? I'm not sure. So, but there are, of course, like alternative futures in terms of, if I don't have this source of income, what do I do? But it's also like, at least like my experience, because I did have this quite a traumatic experience living in Moscow with all the bombings happening there, and not so many people know, but we were also hunted by Italian mafia, and so there was a lot of interesting things happening. So it's kind of like living in that situation is kind of like, and now the content of uncertainty is very different. It's not as life-threatening like as a bombing or Italian guy shooting me, but this kind of like the overall feeling, it was the same. So I also had this really kind of like flashbacks and feeling of a very strong deja vu, that I've been there. I did not like this situation first time, kind of like this movie. It's kind of like, I've seen it before. I didn't like it the first time. I don't want to see it again. And I kind of like, I had this also reactions that first my kind of like perspective, zoop, but then it's like I had to kind of unfold it. And that is very interesting to see. Can we actually stop in a way to kind of having it, coming very much narrow, because that's, I think, also when we start to act more in a reactive way, we are acting from fear, because we are kind of like, we don't see very far. And I think in terms of, and if we can really stop, if we can kind of like and also stop this reactiveness, if we can take a moment to reflect and then respond. So that's when kind of this concept of multiple future and multiple possibilities, I think, can kind of and be very helpful actually, because you're not stuck running in one scenario. Okay, it's all gonna be boom. It's kind of like we are all doomed, kind of thing. So that's kind of like my personal take on it. Not very supported yet by research, but let's see what happens. I'm actually thinking to do some research. So if somebody is interested, I mean, let's plan it. I think it's the golden times for this. Yes. Any other reactions, suggestions, comments? We can't really talk about development. We are still talking about the situation, but I mean, it's understandable. It's very much it's very much the figure at the moment. So we can talk about the figure.
Well, I want just to say thank you, Anna, for all this that you are doing, the last weeks. And I have just like two things that I want to talk. The first one is I'm wondering about the past. When you show the slides from your colleague from Netherlands, about
we lost you.
Sorry, do you hear me?
Now we can hear you. Yes.
Okay. Sorry. I was thinking about the well, we are in Occidental society, most of all. Almost the perception in this vision of the world, and this slide make me think about traditions, because he says it's like the transmission of traditions, and I was wondering about the perception of also of the past, because what happened? Just,
So we were thinking that maybe like if you just have the voice, maybe we can hear you better.
okay, sorry. And because I'm from Colombia, and I know some traditional indigenous people, and it's very interesting their perception about the past, and what they say about the past. They say for us it's not so important to think about the future. We have to think about the past, because if we see the past, we can build our now, not the future. And when they think about the newborn, they say the newborn, his role will be to transmit the knowledge. So it's also a vision of the future, very, very long future, maybe, because it's the transcendental future, but with the newborn. So I don't know, because with this question about the multiple futures, I was thinking, well, if we rethink also our past, maybe we can deal in another way this perception of the future, and this perception of the present. So, well, it's like this kind of insight or reflection I wanted to share.
But that sounds very interesting. I'm wondering if there is some kind of reading about it, like in terms of these conceptions.
Well, yes, well, there are some books. I don't know like scientific research, but I know some books from a person who has done like a cultural work, and also it's not humanitarian, but kind of, who was very interested to how to say this, to put the knowledge of this kind of community that is named Kogis. And for example, 2 years ago, they make a very extraordinary experience here in France. They make like an exchange of knowledge. So a group of 3 mamos, there's like the most representative, and the masters of the knowledge of their community, came here in France to make a diagnostic of the territory. And this diagnostic there was also scientific people. So there was like geograph people, they were like medical scientifics, and biologists, ecologists. Well, a lot of scientific, and they were to this specific territory to observe and to identify what happens in this territory. And then they crossed the knowledge, and was like very, very interesting what happened, because on the first level they could interpret and and the different language, this comprehension of the territory. But in the second level, the mammals begin to explain other things that they say, well, there is a level that we cannot explain to you because right now you just think the land, but you not feel the land. And they said if the people know that the herd feels, they do not do what they are doing, something like this. But there is some documents that I can share then about this experience, and well, the website of this experience. But this is why I'm wondering which is our reference, in fact, because in all the courses I have done about the time perspective, the time perspective of the future is very important because it led us to maybe give sense of our present and deal with all the daily life. But with this new knowledge, I'm asking myself if it's the future, and what about the past? Well, maybe I talk a lot.
But yeah, if you can find this reference also, because next week we have this also discussion about the cultures, so that could be also interesting. Yes.
Yeah. And I have a second question that is like most little question. When I just think about children, and when they say, when I will be adult, I will be I don't know, an astronaut, or so. I don't know at what time they begin to project themselves in the future, like in this future-oriented way. Because in your presentations, we can show that it's like not like kind of limited in the present perspective, but well,
maybe we can ask Rin. Rin, you have kids. You can tell us when do they start project themselves into the future?
Sorry, what did you ask?
No, I'm saying, since you have kids, maybe you can tell us when they started project themselves into the future.
My kids are quite big, but my students are kindergarten teachers, and we have discussed about that, and they tell that around 4 years old children actually understand time, at least how much they need that. Tomorrow, some days later, so 4 years old maybe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anybody else here can answer the question? When do kids get a concept of the future self? That I am going to be an astronaut. Or somebody. The internet seems a little bit strange. Well, I don't know if there are any other questions, comments, suggestions.
I was thinking about how much the time perspective is a choice for a person. You know, at these days, people tell that don't think about bad things, don't think about the future, or think about now, but how much a person actually can choose what to think.
Yes,
Is it question. A choice?
Good question. Any takers to the question? Svetlana, I know you work in clinic. Maybe you have a clinician's view on this.
Um, I thank you for asking me, but I was just wondering if this question refers to also partially to the idea whether time perspective is a trait or state, right? Whether it's something that you are sort of born with, or it's some sort of more of a kind of very flexible and changeable thing. And I don't think that at this point there is an answer, because I think it was discussed in one of those in one of the conferences, how changeable is time perspective. So, and I don't think we came to answer at this point. But I guess if we kind of if we can figure it out, then it will answer the question whether it's a choice or whether it's something that you are born with. Also, we talked a little bit about our kind of ideas about exploring this time perspective, sort of the biological, maybe even, I don't know, genetic foundation of time perspective. And it would be interesting to learn about it, because then we'll kind of figure what is, how much of that is nature and how much of that is nurture, basically. So I guess I'm sure that it doesn't answer a question, and I'm really sorry. But yeah, that's kind of my ideas about it. And I'm very curious about that as well, because in terms of the clinic work, if we're talking about time perspective therapy, then we can sort of answer whether we can do something about it or not. Because if it's something very stable, then what do we do? Do we help a person just to cope with that? Or, I mean, so it does have lots of clinical applications.
Yeah, totally. That's I totally agree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, sorry, but I didn't answer, but just my 2 cents on that.
Thank you. That was a good answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. All right. I don't know if there are any other reflections. Darby?
Is that, I guess you mentioned, or someone mentioned, like, time perspective therapy. What exactly, like, is that? And can you, like, is your time perspective something you can alter? I know we kind of talked about this a little bit, but
Yeah.
and how, like, there's a whole debate about, like, personality and everything, but I don't know if someone could talk more to that.
But for sure there are applications, and I mean, yeah, if we would have the full program in our course, then we would also talk about it. But maybe, I mean, like, we can do an open lecture or a discussion, because we actually quite a few clinicians in the time perspective network. And there are like different approaches that people apply, but for sure there is an interesting clinic done in Hawaii. So they work with war veterans, and so they treat PTSD, and they actually developed a particular approach based on the time perspective. And basically, what they work with is, because when a person has a post-traumatic stress disorder, so this past negative becomes overly accentuated, because people ruminate about these negative traumatic events in the past related to their being at war. And then because once the war is over, or they're coming back from the battlefield, so they are now in normal conditions, and so that's kind of like what was normal at war is really not normal in their regular life. And so it can be very traumatic, this experience. And so the people in this clinic, what they developed an approach of not really So they don't negate these negative experiences, but they strengthen the positive past, because the positive past can be considered as a very strong resource. And so if people manage to refocus from the negative past into the positive past, so that's when actually the totality of the time perspective can be again reestablished. Because what we were discussing today, throughout the time of these different crises, what we see, at least many things happens. So this again, like the totality of the time perspective is broken down. So we are kind of stuck in this very narrow tunnel vision present, no future, and kind of like not so much about the past. Or if you can kind of rely on it, yes, great. But and so but in this regard, so you have this very strong focus on the negative past, and if you are managing to rebuild the focus on the positive past, then you can slowly kind of like stretch out the time perspective more, bring person from that past into the present, and then slowly build up the focus into the future. And it's and if you see at least like some signs that people start even just kind of thinking something about the future. Maybe it's not a perfectly laid out plan, but just kind of a thought that you can see the bridge. Something is about the future is already happening in the thinking process of the person. Then you can really say they're they're much better now. And so that's like a very good sign of recovery, at least for that particular group. And I think also maybe Svetlana can also comment a little bit, because Svetlana works with addictions. And so there is also a particular, so there it's the problem is a little bit like kind of like with the present hedonistic type of thing. And so then there is another view, and maybe the therapy works a little bit different. I don't know, Svetlana, if you want to comment.
Okay. I will try to. We didn't develop a very sort of established or standardized protocol for therapy with people with addictions, but we did research on how people with addictions view their past, present, and future. What we did find that I've presented that before in the conferences, that people with addictions, first of all, they tend to structure their time around the cycle of the use, the experience of the drug or alcohol, and then recovery from that, and then withdrawal, then recovery, then again the use, experience of drug or alcohol, and then kind of withdrawal, and etc. So when they transfer to sobriety, it's really hard for them to start structuring their time differently. And visited St. Petersburg State University in the winter, and I discussed that. It was very interesting that I work with clients, and they would tell me like, well, when not 10 p.m. comes around, like I start feeling nervous. And like when we start talking about like why 10 p.m., well, it's actually in Russia, alcohol is not sold after 10 p.m. until 9 or 10 a.m. the next day. So for people with addictions, for people with alcohol dependence, 10 p.m. has a special meaning. It's not like for other people. So even in that little thing, you can see that they view their time and the structure of their time differently. So when they start recovering, it's very important for them to help to arrange their time around other meaningful things. And for many of them, it becomes difficult. All of a sudden, they have lots of time and they don't know what to do with that, because before that, their time was spent very differently when they were using or drinking alcohol. So kind of from our research, we realized that it's very important to include that part of sort of time organization and reorganization in treatment. But if we talk also a little bit of is it okay that I'm talking that much? Okay. Another part that we found that lots of people with kind of the problems with problematic use and with addiction, they tend to have very high scores on past negative and present fatalistic. And it's very different from, like, in Russian sample, it was very different from like European studies, where they would find that people with addictions in Europe, they tend to have very high present hedonistic perspective, very high scores on present hedonistic. So it's very interesting that maybe, it's either cultural thing, or it's maybe because people in Russia drink for different reasons, and we don't know yet. So
which is still cultural.
Which is still cultural, yeah. But it's very interesting that, again, when you kind of then in treatment, you do have to include the restructuring of past negative, because then past negative becomes sort of maybe alcohol becomes some sort of the coping mechanism for dealing with some past, traumas or other things that might kind of might affect the person functioning in the now, in the present. So it's definitely very intriguing kind of line of research, because it does have several dimensions of how time plays out in the process of addiction and recovery, and that's something that we're currently working on. But definitely sort of not restructuring but reframing the past, and helping clients to deal with their time differently. It's probably kind of couple of goals that should be addressed in effective treatment of addictions.
That's so interesting.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, but I think we close to our ending time. But so thank you so much, everybody who joined. So this is being recorded. So I will also share with it will be up on our also YouTube channel for if you want to rewatch it. And feel free to write any messages if you have any questions. And I'll see you, Darby, in another class. Yes. See you soon.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
I think the Time Perspective Conference is definitely a great place to come, because whatever you do in relation to time can be presented here. You will definitely get a new insight. You can network with people from all sorts of areas, and you promote your work, and at the same time you always leave enriched. So I have to say, this is my first conference, but I definitely do not regret.
Each day has had a very coherent theme that where what happens early on is extended throughout the day. I also like how friendly everybody has been, and the way that you all have gently encouraged us to talk to people that we've not yet met.
The first metaphor that comes to me is it's food for thought. Beautiful recipe with so many ingredients, and all these put together, they make like something very integrated and nourishing.
Thank you for the confusion that happens in our mind during these 4 days, because it's so useful to create a new thought and a new way of working all together. Thanks a lot.
I'm just loving the camera. It's remarkable, actually, in the tradition of conferences. This is really game-changing stuff. It makes perfect sense to me because of my creative background to combine art with science. 260 years ago, when we talked about art, we meant anything that came out of that human. So that's anything that a human being manifested was considered an art. And therefore, every single human being was perceived to be creative first. I think this is full circle, it's the future, and it's brilliant, and I want more.
My experiences have been